record this final lesson of medical psychology. So today's topic is actually quite, I would say, important for the current period of our life in Ukraine. So it is the topic of suicidal behavior, euthanasia, thanatology, as well as psychological counseling and basics of psychotherapy. Unfortunately, we'll only touch psychological counseling and psychotherapy very, very briefly, because these two topics are themselves very broad, and professional psychologists actually learn those topics, study those topics throughout 3 years minimum. So for the medical students, of course, this is impossible according to our program. So I'll only touch it on the surface for you to have the basics, and if you would like to learn more and to broaden your knowledge in this direction, you may read additional materials. Okay, so suicide. I have heard a lot of different opinions about suicide. So a lot of people actually think that people who are suicidal, they are weak, that they are unable to cope with the situations in their life, and that being suicidal means that you are a coward and you refuse to solve your problems. This is not true. Well, at least completely. So, yes, indeed, the person resorts to the suicide when they are faced with the challenges which they cannot bear to overcome. And yes, in some points, this reaction is infantile, because the person doesn't take the responsibility of solving. The person doesn't think about other attempts to solve, but they resort to the escape, and a very radical escape, so trying to get away from life. But this doesn't mean that these people are weak. People who get to suicide, if you are talking about real suicidal attempts and real suicidal behavior, these people suffer from very intense emotions. And yes, at the moment they are suffering from those emotions, they may not be able to do certain steps. They may not be able to see those steps which will help them. But this doesn't mean that they're weak. This just means that they were not capable of solving what was brought onto their shoulders. And at the moment you are suffering from these emotions, from these states, it is very hard to actually think about other opportunities, other ways of solving things. What else? And each person can be a little immature at times, so there is nothing bad if you are showing infantile reactions like this. I would say for sure that approximately each person has felt suicidal at one point in their life, at least. Especially if you are talking about pubescent periods like the teenage years and stuff, when you are trying to find your place in your life and you are having a very, very intense emotions and states. So there is nothing bad in this phenomenon. But you should know, as a doctor, how to react to such things, how to help patients showing such tendencies. And, well, God forbid, in case you end up in such situation, you need to be able to recognize that you need help and to recognize where to get this help. This is kind of a personal topic for me, because when I was a teenager, I actually attempted suicide. So I can tell some things from my personal experience, how it was felt for me. Okay, so suicide is intended self-damage with fatal outcome, and there is a variety of different types of suicides, because there is a lot of different reasons for suicide, And most of the times, I would say that the person who wants to die, they do not want the death itself. Death is merely the negation of life. So when you ask a person who is feeling suicidal, for example, about death, you may get answers like that I want everything to end. For example, I don't want to feel what I'm feeling. Yes. I want my problems to be gone. So such reasons. So rarely the person actually wants to stop existing, to actually be dead, because we do not have the experience of being dead. And the closest experience to feeling dead we have is usually the scariest state we have ever had throughout our life. For example, there was this patient who was afraid of being dead, and when asked about this state of being dead, he described it as something very dark, and you are feeling the cold water running down your spine. And when this person was put into the hypnotic sleep, actually it was retrieved that he was very little when the lights went off in the bathroom very suddenly when he was having a bath, and simultaneously the water turned ice cold, and this traumatized the child to the point that he developed a phobia of being dead, and this experience of being dead was associated with that trauma he had. So such things exist. So what can lead to the suicide? I would say any kind of stress, actually. Proportionally to our ability to overcome it. If you cannot overcome certain stress, it can lead to the suicide, to the suicidal reaction, especially if the person feels cornered. And we are talking about acute stress, we are talking about chronic stress, we are talking about intense stress and weak stress. I would say that the pain the girl feels from being rejected in love, for example, at 12 years old, may be subjectively just as strong as the pain of a man losing his best friend during the war, for example, while being on the battlefield, while seeing it, how his friend dies. So we are not judging our patients for the reasons which led them to these conclusions, to these solutions in suicide. We do not try to wage whether this reason was justified or not. Especially in the acute period when the person is very sensitive. You can address such evaluation only subjectively from the person, how you view this. Is this important to you? Is this important to you after being treated, for example, in the mental hospital? So how do you look at your reason at the moment? But ourselves, we do not judge. Okay. So there are different types of suicide recognized by the types of motives which lie behind those suicides. For example, there may be protest form of suicide when there is a conflict situation and the person tries to get the negative impact on the objective link in the situation. There may be also revenge suicide, which is a specific form of the protest, which is used in order to inflict damage to a certain person via being suicidal. And I think some of you know this thought, like when the person you love hurts you, and you think that, if I was dead, you would have felt guilty for your crimes, and you would actually feel sorry for me. So that's the kind of suicide here, revenge suicide. There is also suicide behavior of appeal type. So when the person tries to get help via being suicidal, they are trying to show that they're in this situation, that they need help. Also, there is a case of avoidance suicide. So yes, when the person cannot deal with what has been put onto them. There was this case, for example, of one, he was either a judge or politician, and I was very surprised to find that this video was stored in YouTube for a very, very long time. So what was the case? This guy was charged publicly with some kind of crime, which was discrediting his reputation. And at first he tried to defend himself publicly with the help of his advocate, with the help of his knowledge and his speech, because he was innocent. But in the end, the only thing he did is shielding himself in front of the reporters when he was giving a speech. So clearly he tried to avoid the situation because he just couldn't bear it. He couldn't get away with the shame of being pleaded guilty when he is innocent. So here is that. There is also self-punishment. Self-punishment suicides can be very, I would say, very violent and very gruesome in some cases, especially when we are dealing with people who are suffering from a psychosis. In this case, often the person is split between the part of identity which is the victim and part of identity which is the aggressor. And I would say that actually, psychologically, it is impossible to hate yourself. It is impossible to hate yourself. Each time when you think that I'm a bad person, I hate myself, I'm feeling guilty, there is some part of your internalized image from outside. So for example, the image of your father, the image of your parent, of your friend, of the person who loves you and who tells you these things, which was internalized and which speaks to you. And because it is internalized, it may feel as if it is your own opinion of yourself, but no, you cannot really hate yourself. It is just not possible. Okay. Also, what else? There is also refusal suicide. This is the types of suicide when the person actually wants to die. This often arises in the situations, for example, when the person is faced with chronic illness, which is lethal, and they just want to fast forward the events. They don't want to suffer physically from pain, for example, especially in such countries in which euthanasia is prohibited, for example, Ukraine. Okay. We have talked about this. When you try to analyze the suicidal behavior of the person, you need to understand what they feel and what they want to get as the result, and what was the motive. This is the key, because most of the times, right after the suicide, the person may not thank you, and the person may not want to hear things about life and stuff. So when I was working with children in the mental asylum, there was this boy who had a lot of lacerations on his neck because he was admitted in the hospital for the 6th time because he slashed his neck. He wanted to die, and he started to open up slowly to me and my colleagues, and I was an intern at the time, so he was talking about the bullying at the school he underwent. He was talking about the abandonment of by his father, by his parents, because he was an orphan, basically. Well, not an orphan, but he was left by his parents, and he felt very alone and he had no friends. Not to mention that he had some negative character traits, which obviously didn't make him the most popular boy around. And my colleague, well, this is, I would say, one of the signs when you notice and know for sure that the person has never experienced, well, yet, this state of despair which leads you to the suicide. So one of my colleagues started telling him that, when you were born with the purpose of the God, like your life is valuable, and such stuff. So very basic stuff you have the urge to tell the person who is undergoing through these things when you don't want to actually feel what they are feeling. And that guy, well, he's 16 years old. Which kind of life purpose at this moment? Which kind of God he doesn't think about this. He wants to have friends. He wants to have acceptance in his society. He wants to feel that he is a part of something, that he is needed by people around. Because he wasn't needed by his parents. He wasn't needed by his friends. He wasn't needed at his orphanage. He wasn't needed at his class. That was his problem, which led him to this. And so obviously he became furious. He started shouting. He was like, you know, everyone tells me this bullshit each time, and it doesn't work like this. I don't feel it, that I have a purpose. You don't understand, and so on and so on. So he just had a tantrum. So in order to calm him, I told him that, you know, when I was your age, I felt so clueless as to how to solve my problems, so lonely and like abandoned, that I felt very sad. And this sadness made me think that maybe I don't want to exist. And he was like, yes, that's what I feel. And I told him but you know, that was back then. And right now I'm sitting here with you, I'm talking to you, and actually I enjoy talking to you a lot, and I'm glad that I'm able to do this, because if at that age I complied with this impulse, I wouldn't be sitting here with you and conversing with you. And he calmed down after that. So he was hurt. He understood that I feel what he feels at that moment. So here is this, and this is also an example of psychological adjustment. I believe I was talking about psychological adjustment on one of the previous lessons. So yes, but that's the part of the psychological counseling I will touch on to later. Okay, so what happened? I don't have actually a presentation for this. I only have the workbook, so I'm looking through the topic, trying to think what I need to tell you, because there is a lot of water here in the topic. Okay, I talked about this. Yeah, so what are the typical traits of the person who is highly at risk of being suicidal? So their position is fixed. They cannot change their state, their situation, or they feel like they cannot change it, because it is very important to understand there may be objective facts suggesting that there is help, there is some opportunity, but for the person their reality is their subjective reality, so their emotional state, especially when they're deep into the depression. And so it means that the person may not see those opportunities. So from their point of view, they're fixed and there is no way of changing the situation, or it changes very, very slowly, and it remains unnoticed. Also, involvement, they're very involved in these emotions. So the person in depression has troubles with their attention, especially with switching their attention. So they get stuck, and since they are depressed, they get stuck on the most negative of the negative emotions. And during the course of the psychiatry, if you want to see my course of psychiatry videos, when I was talking about the topic of mood disorders, I was reading up the description of depressive state made by one of my patients with bipolar depression. She has bipolar affective disorder type 2, and so she described her depressive phase. And in this state, you feel that everything is tied to you, and in the negative state, and in the negative connotation, in the negative background. So everything which happens good to you, you say that it is random. It is, I was just lucky. It is not my achievement that, for example, I got an A in the test. I'm still the dumbest person in the world. And if you see that, for example, something happens very bad with another person, you think, oh no, it is because of me. People don't want to talk me because don't want to talk with me to me because I'm boring. I'm a boring person. Or for example, they hate me, and like I'm disgusting. Or you read the newspaper and you know that that, oh no, they happened because of me, if you are talking about psychotic depressions when the person may develop illusions. So, oh no, everything bad is happening because of me. I'm the source of all the negativities, of all the sins of the humanity. This is how it feels. And this swamp, it sucks you in. It sucks you in and it sucks your energy up, because you may try to get away from these emotions, and this makes you very tense, and this exhausts your energy to the point that you just lie down and you just have no energy to go further. You have no goals and you have no energy to go further. Also, narrowing the sphere of the position in comparison to the sphere of the conflict situation. So once again, the person thinks that the situation is unsolvable, and the more they think about their own weakness in the face of the situation and the almightiness of the conflict situation, the harder it becomes to actually struggle against it. Because, well, you cannot struggle against a God. If you make a God out of your negative situation, well, you are powerless in front of this God. And this is another thing you need to understand when you work with people with depression, people who are suicidal, that you need to decatastrophize the situation. The situation is not almighty. It is not widespread. It doesn't seep into other spheres of this person. So it is important to understand that there are some good parts about your life, not everything. And for this reason, for example, we may ask people with depression to lead diaries and to write down their emotions sincerely, without changing them. And afterwards, while reading the diaries, they may notice that actually they may get positive emotions from certain things. Actually, they may enjoy certain things, while their brain keeps telling them that everything is bad. So we work with this as well. Also, isolation and closure of the position. So once again, you cannot help yourself. You may expect the help of other people. When I was feeling suicidal, it didn't come to this conclusion easily. At first, I tried to ask for the help from my parents, but my parents decided that I'm just demanding their attention. My father didn't want to know how to help me with my situation, so he just became distant from me. So I said to myself, okay, I'll go to my favorite teacher and I'll tell her about my problem. And at that point, well, since I suffered from the transitory psychotic attack, I was very paranoid, and actually going to the teacher was very hard to me. I thought that she wanted to kill me and stuff, and it was very, very hard just starting the conversation with her, because I was completely distrustful, but I understood at that point still that I needed help, that I needed somebody to help me. So yes, I showed myself to the room. She recognized me, she started talking to me, and we started conversing. I told her about my situation, about the symptoms I was undergoing, which I was feeling, and she surprisingly got scared, because teachers are not taught to deal with psychotic episodes, with mental illnesses, and so she became distant as well. She started ignoring me, and at that point I was deeply cut by this. I understand that, like, it is logical for her. She was scared to make things worse, but by this distancing she actually made things worse. So I began to become even more isolated, and I had no friends at that point, so nobody was sympathizing me with my situation. I was just sinking lower and lower and lower. And the final thing which ticked that I needed to kill myself was that I understood that I cannot buy food for myself, because I had a list of foods I needed to buy, but because of the disturbance in thinking, I couldn't actually choose what to buy, even though I had the list right here, and I had the window with all the products I needed right in front of me, and I knew that I have the list, I have the products, I just need to take the product from the list and go in order by the list and the products back home, but I couldn't because all the products were in the same place, and I was hesitant from which product to start. Normal people with no problems, with no psychotic attacks at the moment, they would just go down the list in order. But I couldn't. I just couldn't inhibit all the stimuli which were unimportant at that moment. And therefore I went home empty-handed, got scolded by my parents, couldn't even explain why I had problems attaining food. And at that moment I understood that, like my parents, well, I thought about this like this, and I was 15 years old at that moment, so it is important to remember. I was a teenager. I thought that, okay, I can buy food for myself, and my parents will die one day, and they won't feed me anymore. Probably I will die out of starvation. This will be very painful. This will be very slow. Probably I need to kill myself before it happens. And so that's what I chose. And since, well, okay, I will be talking about this in a minute, so I won't continue my story just yet. Okay, what else? Yeah, also important thing is that the person feels that there is no future when they're feeling suicidal. And this is an important sign because, for example, when we are treating people in depression, when they start making real plans, this is very cool because they're not stuck in their past problems, past guilt. They're looking forward. And if they're looking forward, it means that they're doing something in order to get to that future. So it is very important to have a goal in life. Okay, yeah, so suicidal behavior can be internal and external. Internal forms of suicidal behavior include suicidal thoughts, perceptions, experiences, and also suicidal tendencies, which can be divided into ideas and intentions. Okay, so usually there are stages to the suicide. So on the first stage, there are passive suicidal thoughts, when the person has fantasies about death, but not think about killing themselves just yet. On the second stage, when they have suicidal ideas, they may think about their idea how they will die. So when I decided that I wanted to die, I began searching for the way to die, so how I wanted to die. I knew that I didn't want to suffer too much, that I wanted to die for sure, that I didn't want anyone to know that I want to die because they will interfere, because I actually wanted to die. I didn't want just to direct attention. I wanted the result. And so I chose for that moment that I want to jump out of the window, and I was living on the 8th floor. It is very, very high, and we had asphalt in front of our window, so it would be very painful actually to die like this. Well, it would be very fast but very painful, all in one moment probably. And the only thing which actually bothered me is that there was a very big tree growing right under my window, and I knew that, okay, but I can get stuck on the tree, and this would break my fall, and I may end up being handicapped for my whole life, and like being a burden to everyone, and not actually being dead. And so that was very unnerving, and I was constantly thinking how to fall down in a way that the tree won't interfere with my plans. So here is that. At that stage, I was spending my time sitting on the windowsill and looking down and thinking how to do this properly. I also knew that, well, maybe something will change, and so I told myself that I have a week or a month, I don't remember, it doesn't matter actually. I gave myself some time period to find the sense of life. Obviously, I wasn't looking for any, but at the same time, I gave myself this time. And so I simply waited for this time to pass. And on the third stage, there is the decision component, which leads to the direct transition to external behavior. And when we are talking about external behavior, we are talking about suicide attempts, and if it is completed, about completed suicides. My suicide attempt wasn't successful for very, very good reasons. I couldn't finish it because at the moment when I actually had to die, according to the terms I have set for myself, I was completely obeying the voices I heard in my head, and I actually told you already that I had a psychotic attack. So I completely obeyed the voices, and these voices, because there were 4 of them, they could not come to the agreement how to do this. And therefore I just did nothing. I went to sleep. And then the next day, one of the voices proposed me to find friends. And this was actually the end of the psychosis, because I found some guys to hang with, and they introduced me to their friends and to the friends of their friends, and we started hanging out, and slowly but surely the voices would grow quieter and quieter and quieter, and the psychosis stopped. So I was very lucky. Most people may not snap out of it in time, unfortunately. Okay, so, and when we are talking about complete suicide, this is the suicide attempt which was successful. There are also variants of suicide behavior. So true suicide behavior. In this case, this decision is well considered. The person is preparing for the suicide. Usually they do not tell anyone about their plans, but they may, exhibit some interest in death. So you may notice that, for example, the person started to think a lot about the thanatology and became interested in funerals and like other rituals which are connected with death. Also, there may be affective suicide behavior. This suicide behavior is impulsive. It may be dangerous, but usually it depends on the circumstances, because the person under the influence of strong emotions, affect states, they closest things around they have. So if they have a pencil, they will try, for example, to stick this pencil into their neck or something like this. So if there is nothing very dangerous in front of them, you may be very, very happy that the person won't actually hurt themselves. So here is this. Okay. Also, there may be demonstrated suicide behavior. Demonstrated suicide behavior is usually done on the spot or in direct relation to the conflict situation, and is usually a method of turning the tables in the suicide favor. So, for example, there was this case with a guy who wanted to make his wife care for himself, and so he planned it as that he would hang himself in front of his wife, working inside of the apartment, because he knew at which time she comes home, and so that woman should have become very scared of the situations and obviously saved him and like declared her love for the whole of his life, or something like this. What happened in reality? In reality, he started choking himself as soon as he heard the keys in the lock, and he was clearly hanging from the noose. But the problem was that at that very moment the wife met the neighbor and started chatting with the neighbor for an hour or so. And so when she entered the apartment, she actually found the clothes of her husband hanging from the noose. So demonstrative suicides are usually not very planned, but they are not intended to be lethal. In the very pronounced cases, for example, the person may just leave some superficial scratches on their arms and declare it as lacerations on the veins, something like this. Or, for example, there was this patient with schizophrenia who were to leave So she was homeless, and she got admitted to the hospital because she claimed that she wants to kill herself and that she tried to kill herself with injecting 40 milliliters of air in her veins. And I asked her where is the site of injection, because obviously she didn't do this, and she was like here, and she was pointing at like a very, very, very white scratch on her arm. So obviously she just wanted to sleep in some warm place and not on the railway station. So here is that. What else? Talked about this. Okay, psychotherapy. Psychotherapy of suicides is a very, very hard thing to do, and I wouldn't be very competent to tell you about how to do this correctly, because it all depends individually, and it all depends on the situation you get yourself in. Because one thing is suicide post-vention, for example, when the person is already in the hospital after the suicide, and you manage all the consequences of this, and you manage the person in the circumstances and in the conditions of the tension of the safe hospital environment. And another thing is, for example, when it is suicide intervention, when you see the person with the noose and you need to do something. I had a very difficult experience of actually having a person suffering from depression, being at the height of their suicidal intentions. I would still say that the situation was relatively safe because she was talking to me, but because we were talking distantly via messaging, I wasn't really sure what she's doing at the moment. So maybe she's standing on the roof or something like this. And this was very intense. This was very intense because she was alone. She had no family where she was. She had no medical support there apart from me, because this was during the war and she left to get abroad. She was in this situation of being abroad, so obviously in a very unfamiliar state for her. And I knew that most things which matter for me, especially like some ideals, they won't matter to her in this situation. But there was one thing which I knew, is that she was faithful to her promises, which have a relation to one piece of media she likes. And so that was my last argument, probably, that if you don't want to live for me, please live for them, because you made a promise. And this helped. This snapped her back into senses, and luckily she's still alive. But that was very intense. That was very intense, and I didn't really, at a certain moment, because this person was also my very close friend, at one moment I was actually genuinely scared that I may mess up and the person will be gone, and I will live with this emotion that the person is gone because of me. And this is another thing, that people who attempt suicide, they really think that a lot of people actually suffer afterwards, because when you are dead, you don't feel anything. Really, you do not exist anymore. But there are always people who have felt something towards you. Either it is hatred, or it may be something positive like love or devotion or certain kind of connection. Sometimes even people who hardly know you may think afterwards about you. But you will not feel that devotion because you are dead. Nothing would exist for you. But these people may feel pain, because this pain will never be returned. They will be hurt, just like you, when you have tried to when you attempted suicide. You felt that nobody hears you, Nobody returns your emotions. And these people feel the same. So it is just an unstoppable cycle, actually, of emotional harm when it comes to this situation. Okay, I started to wander off in my thoughts. Let's continue. We've talked about this. Yeah, and there is also such thing as suicide prevention. So where you may notice early signs that the person becomes depressed. So the person stops enjoying their previous interests. The person stops sleeping well. The person stops eating well. The person becomes isolated. They may avoid talking about their emotions. So these are very strange flags to see from your close person. So be very, very attentive. What else I need to tell you? Okay, but what do we do when we are actually faced with death? So inevitably, everyone dies. Most of the times, we die unexpectedly. But sometimes, we are named the day we will die. For example, in the case of chronic fatal diseases. And you may get to this point as a doctor that you may have to tell your patient that they have certain condition which can only be treated till the very end, and they may not have enough time to do everything they wanted in their life. And this is a very, very big responsibility and very, very hard thing to do emotionally. So thanatology kind of helps here. So thanatology is the science about death processes, and everything which involves death. But most of the times, what matters is the reaction of the patient. And you should be ready to any kind of reaction, because every one of us copes with this stress in their own way. So the person may become aggressive. They may try to punch your face multiple times. They may become hysterical. They may lose their consciousness. They may start shouting, start crying uncontrollably, and all this stuff. They may resort to impulsive affective suicide, and on the spot. You should be ready for this. But usually the person who is facing something very hard, they are passing through stages. So these stages include, for example, denial and rejection. So at first the person may not even believe you. They will tell you like, no, I feel fine, I don't have any illness. This is not true. You're wrong. What kind of cancer, doctor? Like, this is nonsense. I can't have cancer at 20 years old. Then when it comes to the person that actually no, there is no mistake, it is actually their diagnosis, they start to protest. So this is the stage you will get beaten most of the times. Then they may start bargaining or ask for postponement. So for example, well, maybe I'll do another test and it will show that everything is fine with me, as if that's decide our state of health. They may tell you that, I'll find another doctor, another specialist, and they will check me and everything will be fine. Or, well, maybe you are wrong and I don't have 1 month to live. Maybe I have actually 3 years to live, or even 10 years, or even 50. Well, if you do this, maybe I'll have 1 more day to live. Yes? Well, tell me something, doctor. So that's what happens. Bargaining doesn't help. Well, the doctor would be very happy to help you. I think that any person who is starting their career as a doctor is still very full of hopes, and they still actually want to support their patient in this problem. But sometimes they cannot. And so reactive depression comes. The person feels powerless, fixed, isolated in their emotions. death is inevitable, and they face it. And they face it not in their elderly years, when people naturally think about death a little bit more, and when they're actually more content with this end. But they may face it at 15 years old, at 20 years old, at 9 years old, even when they are barely able to understand the concept of death. So a depressed person at one point is a very good patient, because they may not oppose your recommendations, they may just accept anything you do for them, but at the very same time they may not do anything themselves, and in this way they will just fast forward their death, because when the person just lets themselves fade away, there is nothing you can do. You can propose them the best treatment of the best, but if the person just wants to go, they will go. There is no better ally in the fight with the illness rather than the patient themselves, because it is their illness. And so at the fifth stage, if the person actually overcomes the depression, if they are helped by very professional psychologists, by professional psychiatrists, they enter the state of acceptance of own death. And many people think that acceptance is loving the idea of death, or that acceptance is something when you do not notice that this happens. But actually, acceptance is calmness. You may notice and think about your own death, for example, but it doesn't make you tense. It is just a fact, and it is always there, and you can look at it without being scared of it, and you can look away when you want, so you are not fixed on this idea anymore. Your relationship with this fact is as even as possible, and sometimes you may even find good points in this outcome. That is acceptance. That is what we want for our patient, for them to go away calmly, because psychologists say that people who die in agony usually have a lot of emotional baggage which wasn't unpacked in time. Okay. So the patient may not come to the terms of their death. The patient may want to fast forward events, and at this moment they may ask you for euthanasia. So what is euthanasia? Euthanasia is a set of certain actions or inactions taken in order to fast forward someone's death, to facilitate his dying. It is a very tricky question, because in some countries euthanasia is legalized, and in some countries euthanasia is actually prohibited. In Ukraine, euthanasia is prohibited, and I would say that it varies on the reason for which the person asks for euthanasia. What you need to remember, generally, in order to get euthanized, the person should be in full, clear consciousness when given their own permission and signing a lot of documentation, being an evidence that they actually willingly comply with the process of being euthanized. This is very important. Remember that clear consciousness, not under the influence of drugs, not under the influence of alcohol, not under the influence of anything, not being decided for a third person for them to be euthanized behind their back. No, personally the patient. And the illness they've been euthanized from should be chronic, should be fatal, and should be not able to be treated. Should be not able to be treated at the moment of the development of medicine. Why I'm stressing this is that there was a case, for example, of Jack Kevorkian. There was this such doctor from Georgia, or not Georgia, so he has a Georgian surname, who got into the court because he constructed a machine for euthanasia. So the person would come into this machine, push a button, and get injected with poison. So it is a self-euthanasia machine. And he got into the court because the latest patient out of 52 patients he had who used this machine was suffering from Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is the illness of mental origin, and it causes dementia, and dementia impairs the individual ability of the person to judge their actions. So here we see the problem with the first point, having a clear consciousness and ability to decide for yourself. So that's why he had problems with the code. Another very tricky case was maybe 3 or 2 years ago. I heard about the woman from who was Dutch, who got euthanized for having treatment-resistant depression. Well, at least she claimed it was treatment-resistant, and she was 40 years old, and for 20 years she was getting a lot of psychopharmacological treatments. She was getting a lot of physical treatments, even electroconvulsive therapy. Like, she tried everything, and psychotherapy as well, but she claimed that nothing helped, and she was suffering a lot, and she wanted everything to end. And her request was accepted. She was euthanized, but the scientists split into 2 parts. The first side decided that it was legal, and the second side decided it was not legal. I'm with the side who thinks that it was not legal, because I would say for 20 years, if you have a chronic illness, and you are trying everything you can in order to get to get better, yes, the only way when you do not get better in such a long term is that you refuse to adapt your illness to your life and your life to the illness at all. And this is very important. We do not treat illnesses just by ingesting tablets. We do not treat illnesses just by getting shocked on the electroconvulsive therapy. No. At least half of the success depends on the actions the patient takes in order to adapt themselves, to accept the situation. And acceptance comes with understanding that yes, this illness exists, and it may be with me forever. Yes. And while adapting to the illness, actually the symptoms may not bother you anymore. And so, especially it is very strange that she says that psychotherapy didn't help, because psychotherapy has the goal of adapting the person. So in this case, I would say it is not the depression which was refractory. It was actually the person's unwillingness to work. She didn't want to get cured, like from the very start, because for 20 years you would learn how to live with your illness. You have lived for 20 years with certain illness. This means you know something which keeps you going, but she just refused. And well, that's her attitude to the illness. Okay, this is solely not the reason why we should prohibit her from being euthanized, but I also know as a psychiatrist how depression can alter your thinking, can alter your values, and you may not believe me, but things you have loved the most for your life, like yesterday, if you have depression today, you will not even remember those things. They will be bleak, they will be grey for you. And this is the problem. This is the violation of the point of clear consciousness and rational thinking. She was not thinking rationally. She was not able to assess her situation critically enough, because the depression is such kind of illness. And that's why I actually very, I would say, very strict in the questions of euthanasia. Even though I would say that I have no right to judge which pain is worse, the pain from cancer or the pain from the vital grief in case of depression. Luckily for me, I haven't felt the campaign for cancer just yet, but I have felt the grief of depression. It is indeed very, very difficult to bear. But there was also an exit. Another thing is that another side of this is that she, in that case, she could have killed herself easily throughout these 20 years if she wanted to die, but she didn't. I remember that she tried to tell that, well, people were getting into this process and they were like stopping her from killing herself. But really, for 20 years, if you really want to die that hard, you will find a way easily. So in this moment, you may also see that there is a trait of transporting responsibility onto others. You will kill me, and not me. I want to die, but you should do this. I won't do this myself. I don't want to feel guilty about my death after that. So something like this. Yes, of course, usually people who do such things, they have some kind of retribution from another sphere, like, for example, obstetricians who both take the process of birth and they help the children to be born, and they also take abortions. But still, this is a certain amount of guilt which will be placed on another person who pushes the button, and nobody wants to push the button and kill another person, actually. So that's another question. Will you be the doctor who euthanizes your patient, or would you choose somebody else? That's the question. Okay, so that's euthanasia. We have talked about this. Okay, the last part of our lesson, thankfully, because I want to sleep very, very hard. So now we are talking about psychotherapy. If you talk very narrowly, psychotherapy is the application of mental effects for the treatment of the patient. It is all the non-biological and non-physical methods of effect on the patient. If you talk wildly, anything can be psychotherapeutic, because psychotherapy contributes to the enhancing our level of life and our bettering ourselves, betterment of ourselves. Anything can be psychotherapeutic if you know how to apply the action you choose for the psychotherapy in such a way that it will be psychotherapeutic. If you're a skilled psychotherapist, it is not a problem for you, because you know the structure, how the psychotherapy should work, and you know the goal which you want to get, yes, the result, and you know the patient you're working with. If you are not as skillful, it is okay. It comes with the experience. But I would say that anything can be psychotherapeutic. And on the most basic level, any person who has lived long enough to reach 30 years of age, they have their own mechanisms of psychotherapy, because it wouldn't be possible just to live so long. Okay. So psychotherapy can be divided into different types. I would... it is actually very hard to talk about this, because there is a lot of different schools of psychotherapy, a lot of different directions, and different types and styles. In the most basic things, I need you to divide all these types of psychotherapy into more those based on the more rationality and thinking, and those based on the emotional states, even though our thinking depends on the emotional states. So these types are interdependent. So what I mean by this, some people just need the coaching. They know exactly what problem they have. They're mature enough to talk openly about their emotions and about the objective state of things, and they will comply with your recommendations and will actually go and reach their goal. They just need to have a bit of advice how to do this correctly. So that is an example of a rational therapy. Cognitive behavior therapy is also more rational, and it works, for example, for people with psychasthenic traits, like people with obsessive compulsive disorder and such stuff. When we're talking about emotional types of therapy, these types of therapy are usually based on the indirect effect of our state. So they are not so dependent on the conscious understanding of what is happening. So those are suggestive types of psychotherapy. So hypnosis, narco-hypnosis, working with metaphors, with fairy tales. Also sometimes, well, art therapy is mostly like cathartic type of therapy. So we pour our emotions onto something medium, something physical, in such a way that it helps to remove these emotions from ourselves into the outside world so that we can modify it. And then we internalize it in a changed state. So cathartic therapy. Also, different autogenous training and relaxation techniques. So we try to influence emotional states through the body because once again, I remind you, our emotions are simply a set of our sensations in the body and certain state of our functions at any given moment of time. So we can influence those if we influence those functions. I would say that the best psychotherapy is usually eclectic. You do not choose only one type of psychotherapy, only one type of direction, but you look at the situation and at the patient in front of you, and you choose the most appropriate at any given moment. I would say that it is very rarely that the person who is very intellectual, who is very rational, that they will actually follow your advice. That they do not have any kind of cognitive distortions towards the action, that they will not comply with their impulses at a certain point. They may not and agree with everything you tell them to do. And they will be like, yes, I will do this, and I will do that, and I will come home, and I will run a mile tomorrow, and I will start studying tomorrow, and I will go, like, I don't know, I will reach all my goals starting with tomorrow. And then they go and they don't do anything. Not because they're dumb, not because they don't want to be treated, but because emotionally, their emotional state is changed. And you need to work with that emotional state in order for the result to be consistent. So it is best to combine those two methods and, for example, to use metaphors together with some rational conversations with your patients. And this helps to avoid these defenses the patient may put in front of them, because, you know, we always oppose the way of how other people try to change our emotional state, our state as well, like in general, because it is normal. We don't know how it would be once we change. We are not adapted to this change. We don't know what comes in the future. But right now, even if I feel very bad, at least I have been in this state for a very long time, and I know how it works and what to expect from this state. And if I will be healthy, how would I live? I don't know. This is something strange. This is something scary. So this is the logic which works here. What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? Yeah, also psychotherapy can be group, collective, and individual. So what's the difference? When we're talking about individual psychotherapy, it is understandable, one by one, psychotherapist and the client. When we're talking about group and collective ones, difference is in the connection between members of these therapies. When we're talking about group psychotherapy, the psychotherapist influences the group. And when we're talking about collective psychotherapy, each member of the group influences one another. That is the difference between those. There is also family psychotherapy. It is a variant of system therapy when we are working with the whole family. That is very good, especially when we work with children, because children are mostly under the influence of their parents. So that's what you need to remember. So this thing, I have talked about this. What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? Well, most of these things you can read in your workbook, so I don't want to repeat it. Yeah, only one thing. Schools, psychological schools. There is classical psychoanalysis. It is very rational. It was made by Freud. It was very strongly based on the libido drive of the person, which is the sexual drive, and the drive to be alive, basically. And it was highly critiqued because Freud based his psychoanalysis on the 13 people he worked with. So it was a very, very small part of people. There is also Jungen Psychoanalysis, so it is much more, I would say, magical and metaphorical. Jung was a very big fan of archetypes, and at a certain point he almost goes psychotic. So I like Jung a little bit more than Freud. I'm not that rational, I think, even though I try to be. There is also psychosynthesis. So in this case, we are talking about the idea that our identity is a combination of our subpersonalities, and the goal of psychotherapy is to combine the subpersonalities into one. There is also positive psychotherapy. There's also, in your workbooks, you may see that it is written that there is also neuro-linguistic programming, but I urge you to remember that neuro-linguistic programming is not a school of psychotherapy. It is a method of quick learning and modeling abilities. It is not the psychotherapy. It can be used as an instrument of psychotherapy, just as I mentioned before, if you know what you are doing, but it is not by itself a school of psychotherapy. People who claim that this is psychology, neuro-linguistic programming, they are info gypsies. I don't know how to call them. I don't want to offend gypsies, but there is a term like for people who are selling air. So no, it is not psychotherapy. There is also logotherapy, which is actually very, very popular right now and very useful in the times of war. When you cannot change your situation, but you can change your attitude to the situation, you can find a new meaning in your existence. Also, there is non-reductive client-centered psychotherapy and psychotherapist-centered psychotherapy. Psychotherapist-centered psychotherapy is usually based on the personality of psychotherapist, if they are very charismatic, and if it serves the goals of psychotherapy. And the client-based, we go with the flow of our client. Our client's wish is the law. Sometimes it is helpful, sometimes it is not. There is also Gestalt Therapy based on the idea that we have certain unfinished businesses and we need to close them. And there is also the Transactional Analysis. So based on the idea that we have three parts of our identity, so the child part, the adult part, and the parent part. And these roles, they affect how we interact with other people, and people like to play games. Certain interactions which do not give any goal, but which produce a lot of emotions. So that's the basic idea. Indications of psychotherapy. So psychotherapy can be used when the person is not under the influence of very potent drugs. So very big dosages of medication usually makes it harder for the changes induced by the psychotherapy in order to be put into the action. But I would say that I have talked with my colleagues and we came to the conclusion that no, like medical, like psychopharmacological agents are not as potent as we think, but still there is a certain delay in the reaction of psychogenic influences to psychogenic influences when the person is under drugs. Also, many psychiatrists believe and tell that acute psychosis is a contraindication for the psychotherapy. Mostly this is told in order for people not to refuse to take pills in order just to do psychotherapy when it clearly doesn't help in the situation. And also because in acute period of psychosis, the patient may be aggressive. And while working with the psychotherapeutically, you may underestimate the danger. Not to mention that some forms of psychosis may be vitally dangerous for the person, so they may be fatal, which obviously is an indicator for acute emergency medical help and not just psychotherapy. But I would say that the range of effects of psychotherapy on the person depends on the level of skill of psychotherapist. Because I have seen skilled psychotherapists working with people in psychosis, even in acute forms, which were able to help with some symptoms, not all, of course, but some symptoms for a certain amount of time. So obviously there is some effect, but you need to understand that when we have a psychosis, which is a very deep change in our psychic functionality, on the basis of neurology, on the basis of our physiology, on the basis of structure, sometimes it is not enough just to use psychotherapy, and it is not enough just to use tablets, just to use psychopharmacology. It should go in conjunction. And usually we start with psychopharmacology when the person is very acute and proceed onto the psychotherapy. But using only one or another doesn't get you to the results you need, and in some cases may be harmful. So only in conjunction, appropriately to the stage of the illness, or not resorting to it at all. That's what I wanted to tell you. Okay. We have talked about this. We have talked about that. Yeah. Why I'm telling you this? For a very long time, for example, in Ukraine, it is told that you cannot use psychotherapy in schizophrenia because people are producing delusions and stuff. But there is a certain type of cognitive behavioral therapy called metacognitive therapy, which is aimed at delusional ideas. So it was made for people with schizophrenia, like specifically for them. It was patented for this. So why not use it? Just because you think psychotherapy doesn't work. And this is another side effect of our convictions. If we think that something doesn't work, it would show lowered results comparable to the statistical measures, just because we influence these results. Okay, psychological counseling. I will tell you very basic stuff. When you are working with the patient, you need to adjust yourself for the patient in order to make it easier for them to transfer onto you their emotions, to project onto you, and to identify later on. Then you unite with them, so you show your empathy. You show them that you understand them, you know what they feel, like actually know what they feel, and not just lie to them. Then you lead them through the solution of their problem, and then you utilize this union. So utilization means that you actually brought your patient to the conclusion, to the solution, and then the patient comes and applies all what they got from the session of psychotherapy. This is the basic stage of psychotherapy. A lot of people start with the leading right away without being united first with the patient, without adjusting. This is a very big problem because it causes a lot of oppression, a lot of struggling from the patient, and it makes your work harder, your job harder, and sometimes resultless. So here is that. What else? Yeah, and leading also means that you show the way for the person. You take them by the hand and show them the way to your situation where there is a solution, from the situation where there is no solution. So that's why it is called leading. Okay, what else? We talked about this, we talked about that. Counseling, we talked about this. I won't be talking about all these techniques because, well, we just don't have enough base to discuss these things, unfortunately. Okay, we talked about this. Okay, about rehabilitation. Very, very briefly. Medical rehabilitation should have early onset, be continuous, have step-by-step approach, because you cannot expect from your patient to do everything in one moment. A complex nature of rehabilitation, and also individual approach, because people are motivated by different things. And different types of rehabilitation. So medical rehabilitation is the process aimed at restoring medical and other methods of the functional capabilities of the human body. So we're working with the body here. There is also professional rehabilitation, when we restore the working capacity of the person. And professional rehabilitation usually means that we help the person to keep their specialization they had before the illness. They keep the job they had. There is also labor rehabilitation, but it is different. So labor rehabilitation is about the process of adaptation of a disabled person in a specific workplace, but it's not about their specialization. It's about the condition they work in, labor condition. And there is also social rehabilitation, so restoration and enhancement of their social connections, which is also very important and plays a vital role in the person reconvalescing from the illness. There are also different levels of prevention of disability. There is primary, when we reduce the incidence of functional impairment. There is also secondary prevention, so when we restrict the degree of this impairments which already occurred. And tertiary prevention of disability, when we prevent the transition of arising or congenital functional disorders at the level of disability to permanent defects, leading to the increase in disability and capacity for work. So basically this is it. I wish everyone who is going to pass today's tasks good luck on the final lesson. And this is all for the course of medical psychology. See you another day.